data analysis portion and things now that we've received some of the data for the work that we've done. I already met with Cody and Brandon, so I'm going to go over, and I've got a Zoom recording that I'll post for that so people can see how that was all done. I'm going to go over the other 3 projects and the data that we collected from it. So our goal is to analyze the data and come up with a poster presentation as well as the final paper. And so the first thing is to analyze the data. So let's go ahead and do that. And the one that we want to look at is for today's flight, or today's study, is the Scott and Wilson one, the flight survey, where we're looking at 2 scenarios with a G1000 with synthetic vision versus the same scenario but with a conventional 6-pack and a basic GPS system that's not quite as detailed as that synthetic vision. What I did notice, and is a limitation and an issue with this study actually, and I missed this when I was reviewing it, and then when I gave the study to some people, they came back to me and they were like, hey, note that when the scenario is saying we're going to go up to Fairbanks and we're going through this mountainous pass through McKinley and all that good stuff, which is great, and Chulitna is there as well. But when we look at the weather, I should have picked this up. The weather at Fairbanks for this particular study, since it's our destination, really should have been VFR or MVFR. In this case, it's IFR. So that would have put people off in terms of wanting to go off the bat, regardless of what system that they had. But if we had it where our departure Talkeetna Airport through the pass, if Talkeetna was VFR, which it is over here, and Fairbanks is pretty much close to VFR, and then everything else, Chulitna and McKinley were marginal to IFR, then that would have probably gotten us different results. So that's a limitation that we might have seen in this particular study that you might want to expand in the final paper discussing that. Regardless, let's go ahead and collect the data here. This was one of the surveys that we did between 2 groups, or between 2 scenarios, but within the same group, so the same person looking at the two scenarios. So what we want to do is, if you're the owner of this survey, you're able to pull out the data. You go to responses. We got 11 for this particular study. I was hoping for some more. I was hoping for close to either 15 to 30 people. The more the better. So we're not quite at the power range. We needed 15 for power based off what we calculated before. That's fine. We're gonna make this work. So what we're gonna do is download the data, download the responses, and we're gonna take a look at it. So here's what the result looks like. Okay, so we've got this as the raw data, and we're going to need to get some information out of this. So based off of this, what we want to do, if you're not very familiar with Excel, here's some tips and tricks that I've learned over the years. Let's first select these columns and go ahead and what we call wrap text, so that now we can actually see what's going on here. We don't need the timestamp, so I'm going to go ahead and delete that column. We don't need that. There you go. And it doesn't look like there's any information here, so we'll delete that row as well. There you go. So we've got now this information. And we've got all this data points right here. And we have 2 scenarios. So we know that the first few questions, these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, this is the willingness to fly scale, and so that's from the first scenario. This is the 3D synthetic vision scenario. So what I like to do is separate it from these answers right here. So I'm going to give a separation of 3 columns. I'm going to right click and hit insert, and that opens up 3 blank columns that I can separate the 2 sets of data. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the second set. There you go. So what that says is this is one individual. This result, this row, is one individual. These are the responses for the 3-dimensional synthetic vision willingness to fly. and then they get the same scenario, and then they're given that six-pack with an older GPS system, and these are the results that they got from. This is the results they posted for willingness to fly with that system, same flight and everything like that. So what we want to do is compare the difference between the two willingness to fly scores that they got with that. And the way we're going to want to do that with a Likert scale system is we're going to find the average scores between the two. So the average score of the G1000 versus the average six-pack, we'll call it. Oops, helps if I can spell it correctly. What I like to do is also highlight this in red, just because it's just easier to separate. I like color coordination and all that good stuff, so we're going to do it that way. So the way we do averages in Excel, if you haven't used this before, is we hit equals for the function of average, open the brackets, and select the set of data that we want to average, and in this case, this particular side of the row. Close the brackets and hit enter. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy what I did there and paste it down the column. So these are the average scores for the synthetic vision. We already see there's some people that are kind of low, and I think that probably played a role with respect to the whole Fairbanks being IFR, and that's going to be kind of a what we would call a confounding variable. That variable there of it being IFR at Fairbanks is probably affecting the results of this study, but that's fine. For the purpose of this class, we're going to be just analyzing the data as if everything went perfectly. And what I would like to do is make this either 3 significant figures or 2 decimal places. So I'm going to go over here, and under the formatting of the numbers, over here is going to decrease the decimal places. So I'm going to decrease it down to where it looks like this. So 2 decimal places, or basically 3 significant figures since it's only 1 through 5. So that gives me the average willingness to fly for this individual with a G1000 and synthetic vision. I'm going to copy this. Actually, before I do that, then I want the average aggregate score, the aggregate average score, the average of the averages of the willingness to fly for the 3D synthetic G1000 scenario. So we're going to do average again of the and this time I'm averaging the average scores of willingness to fly per individual. And that's going to give me the value willingness to fly from Talkeetna into Fairbanks with that cockpit configuration. It's a little lower than I thought it would be. I was hoping for it hypothetically in terms of a hypothesis. If I was doing this study, that value would be higher because the synthetic vision would make people more comfortable to do that. And again, I think that Fairbanks scenario is definitely playing a role with this value over here. We're going to do the same thing for the 6-pack and see if there's a difference between the two. So I'm just going to copy this column set of equations, and it's going to do the same thing over here. And what's nice is it figures out that it's going to copy, instead of this row, it's going to say, okay, find the average of this row. If I look at the equation, it highlighted the right correct row. That's what Excel's good at, unless you state it otherwise. The 6-pack, we've got a much lower score, which is kind of interesting. So if I were to do a bar chart, so average, so let's say willingness to fly score, average score, and then we've got the synthetic vision, and we've got the 6-pack configuration. And we now know that the scores are 2.27 from that Likert scale, 1.4 for the other one. If I select this set of data right here, or this table setup that I've just done, and in Excel I go to Insert and insert a bar column, we can see that there's a change, a nice descriptive change between the two scores. And this can be used in your final paper or in the poster, and I'll show you that in a little bit here. I'm gonna change I like to change the color between the two columns just so that it's clear that it's different, right? They're two different scenarios. So if you double click the bar that you want to change, it'll pull up on the right hand side a formatting panel. If I go to the bucket diagram here and I change the color, usually blue and orange are the two colors we typically use in these studies. So there you go. You've got yourself 2 scores, 2 willingness. It clearly shows that there's a change, but we don't know if it's statistically significant or not, but there is a change. Less people are likely to fly with a 6-pack configuration, which kind of is what we were hypothesizing based off that. All right, we've got that part done. Now let's see. We also want to add some descriptive statistics. We want to know how many, let's see here. Let's do the average hours. What was the average hours of our respondents? 368. And how many were in Alaska? So we'll kind of get an idea of, hey, do I need 208? So based off my respondents, my average hours of flight is 368 hours, which isn't that high, which kind of could be a future recommendation of this study. So maybe find higher hours, maybe find the difference if there's look at to see if there's a difference, a relationship between higher hour pilots in this scenario, both the scenarios of the synthetic vision versus the 6-pack, and lower hours, if hours play a role with the differences between the two. So that kind of gives us an idea based off the data that we collected to be used for a future study, and that could be expanded on the future study portion of this project, and I'll explain that later as well. We also want to know how many males or females responded to this study, and since there's so little, it's easy to do that manually, but I want to show you really quickly how I would do this in Excel. If it was, let's say, 1,000 respondents, 1,000 cells, there's a function called the COUNTIF function. And what you do is you type in count equals COUNTIF, and you select the range of data that you want to look at. That's the range. And the criteria is what you want to count. In this case, I typed in exactly the way your data is being formulated or formatted, and I put it in here. So I want to count how many are males. And that's going to automatically count it for me. So I do the same thing for female. So I select the range, and since I typed in exactly the way the data would be shown in this column, female, put the comma over there, click on female, and there you go. Now it's going to count everything that has whatever you wrote in this cell is going to be counted on within this row. And there's 5 females. Now, why did I do that? Well, the reason is I want to see if there's a difference in how many males versus females responded to this study. And the reason for that is because, well, if let's say I had 1,000 responses and 1,000 of them were males, my results are basically saying, hey, these are only based off males, or the majority are males. So we want to see if maybe gender plays a role. Maybe females have a different response than males. And so this is also another reason why we collect that piece of information, to help us give a better, bigger picture of our results. Hey, can gender play a role? Can hours play a role? Can type of pilot experience play a role? So let's see how many. Let's do the same thing. How many commercial, instrument, private, let's see what else are there, instructor. I'm not too worried about tailwheel and seaplane actually at this point. So the same thing, COUNTIF, select that, comma, and commercial, close brackets, and hit enter. So not getting quite the answer that I want. Commercial. I know I can see some commercial already. There you go. All right, what I did there was, sorry, I was trying to remember what I did wrong there. The asterisk is a wild card. Basically, if in any part of the cell contains the word commercial, that's how I did it there. So the quotation marks is is to define that I'm looking for a string. So I put quotation marks on each side, and the string that I'm looking for is the word commercial. But because for example, in this particular cell, there's the words commercial instrument and tail wheel. It's not going to pick it up because it's got other words in it. So I have to put this asterisk that says, if you put the asterisk between the actual string, you're saying, hey, count anything that has the string in it at any point in the cell commercial. So we'll do the same thing in instrument because there's some that are mixed in with commercial. So count if, and then choose the range that we want right here. Quotation marks, instrument. That's the way you want to look at it. There you go. I'm going to copy paste that in there, but instead of instrument, I'm going to put it as private. I'm just going to make sure I have the right range. Sometimes it does that. There you go, private 5, and then same thing, just there you go. So let's insert and look at it from a bar chart point of view, and we can see that it's pretty evenly split, so maybe the results don't really show a difference in terms of the responses for, let's see, experience. Let's call it experience. So most of our responses were private pilots, and so we could say, all right, this is based off private pilots. They may not want to really even do this flight because they're not as familiar with that type of flying. However, since it's pretty evenly spread across commercial instrument and private, maybe it doesn't play quite as much of a role in terms of ratings. Ratings may not play a role in this particular case. So here you go. That's the basic Excel side of things with respect to the results. Now we want to see if it's statistically significant. Is there a statistically significant difference between the scenario using synthetic vision versus the average six-pack? Remember, when we do these sort of statistics, we're not trying to prove anything. It doesn't prove that people are going to fly with synthetic vision versus the six-pack. No, we don't prove anything. We just say that it supports the theory or supports the hypothesis or adds to the evidence. It's evidence that supports that more pilots would be willing to fly mountainous terrain with synthetic vision than the average six-pack. That's what we're doing here. We're trying to add or support our hypothesis if it's statistically significant. Just because we've got a decrease, less people are likely, it shows that there's clearly less likelihood or less willingness to fly a six-pack configuration. It does not mean that it's statistically significant, right? It doesn't add to that statistical element of the research study. So we have to use SPSS to do the t-test, or sorry, Wilcoxon sign rank test because it's a Likert scale scenario. So I'm going to add a new one here because I was working on a different project earlier. And now what I want to do is select the two sets of averages, so the average of the scores, copy that over and put that into the first column of variables, and then copy the second group, the second set of results. Right? This is a within group study. Go to variable view, and we're going to change this to, this is the synthetic, and this is the six-pack. That way I can differentiate between the two sets of variables. All right, so that's our data. And now we want to analyze it. Go to non-parametric test because it's a non-parametric test like I did in the statistics analysis because it's a Likert scale within group, not between groups. We're not using two different groups to do this study. We're using the same person to respond to do two different scenarios in a Likert scale measurement. We go to legacy dialogues, and then we go to two related samples because they're related to each other, to the same people. And we're going to put these two into here, synthetic versus six-pack, and we're doing a Wilcoxon type test. Okay. And there you go. That's our results. So that's the difference between a six-pack and a synthetic. And it's actually statistically significant. Look at that. 0.008. Remember, we want it to be p is less than 0.05 for it to be statistically significant. So there is a statistical significance between people who, pilots flying a G1000 with synthetic vision through mountainous terrain are more willing to fly statistically than those who are going to be given a six-pack with a basic old GPS system in it. That tells us a few things. What can we infer with this? We can say that people are more willing to take the risk of flying through mountainous terrain with poor weather if they're given the right, or they're given a set of tools or data set, or not data set, a set of tools such as newer technology. They're more dependent on that. They're more risk. Here's how I'd see it. They're more risk-taking if they are given newer technology. It's the same flight, right? It's the same flight, same airplane. It's a Cessna 172, but one has better technology or newer technology than the other. They are more risk-taking, right? It's a high-risk flight. You're going through terrain with poor weather in there, but they're willing to fly that flight with, as long as they have the better synthetic vision. That's the results there. And in order to write this out properly, so that would be part of your discussion and results, but the statistical results portion, I like to go to Laird, statistics Laird. If you just Google Wilcoxon statistics Laird, it'll bring up this page. And it kind of shows you how to do it all and then write it all. So here's our test statistics. We get a z-score and a statistical significance score. In this case, it's 0.07. In this example, which is not statistically significant, ours was 0.008, which is statistically significant. So let me just show you how I would write it. I would just use this definition here to help us out. Here, a Wilcoxon signed rank test showed that, and we'll just delete this. This is the first group. Showed that we're willing to fly a higher risk flight with given let me see how I want to write it. A Wilcoxon signed rank test showed that pilots were willing to fly a higher risk flight compared to There you go. That's one way you could write it. There's multiple ways you could approach the way you would write those results. But this is one way. A Wilcoxon signed rank test showed that pilots were willing to fly a higher risk flight given synthetic vision tools compared to when they are given a basic six-pack aircraft. The results elicited a statistically significant difference in willingness to fly scores. And then you put in the results. Z is equal to, in this case, negative 2.66, so we'll put that in there, negative 2.66, and P is 0.001. It was actually very significant, right? There you go. That's the results, statistical results portion. You do have to explain a little bit more what that all entails, and then in the discussion you want to talk about the inferences you can make. So excuse me, that's going to be part of the discussion point. So that's how that statistical analysis is done. So let me show you what the poster is going to look like. So if you've got, I posted this on our page, our course page. If we go to course content and then scroll all the way down, I gave a UAA poster template for presentation example. You can download it. And so this is how it would be set up. So you change the title, pilot decision to fly with synthetic vision through mountainous terrain versus a 6-pack, traditional 6-pack. There you go, that's a better way to do it, through mountainous terrain. You would change the background, purpose of the study, you'd fix up your methodology, but then here you go. We can delete this one, total willingness to fly for each scenario, and then here we go, we can copy it from boom, right there, put that into, if that works, hopefully it didn't crash my airplane, crashed my computer, and it might have not liked that very much. So let's see here. It's not responding. All right, that's okay. What I'm going to do, just so for the sake of, instead of copying it, I'm just going to screenshot it, just to give you an idea of what it should look like. There you go. So we can put this graph in here. What you could also do is take this one out, because this is a different study obviously, and we can put in some of our descriptive statistics of the results that I told you about. So we can look at put that in here. You can put a little bit of a description here. So the results, you could say something along the lines of there were, I think it was 15 or something, or 11 responses to this study. Six male, 7 female. You get the idea. I'm just making this up real quick. And then even there you go. That's some descriptive statistics. The findings indicate that we can delete some of this. The findings indicate that pilots are more willing to fly a higher risk flight, higher risk mountainous terrain flight. And again, this is however way you want to write this out, it's up to you. The findings indicate that pilots are more willing to fly a higher risk mountainous terrain flight if they are given an aircraft that has newer technology such as a G1000 with synthetic vision. They were less willing to fly the same flight with a traditional 6-pack. And then you can delete that. I'm just giving you an example of how I would do this. Go there, I'm going to copy this, and this is where you'd add the statistical analysis. Ooh, cool. Let's put that, paste, unformatted. There you go. And there's your statistical analysis. There's a couple graphs there that maybe you'll use, and you can maybe split that into two. Let's do that. I'm going to just show you how I would do it, just so you can see my thought process here. We're going to do, make this a little cleaner than I would, obviously. So we're going to fit the gender ratio over here, and then fit the experience chart over here. Bring that down just a touch, because what I'd like to do, what I think I'd like to do in this particular example, you know, for it, and it lends itself to it, I'd probably want to clean this up a little bit better so it looks nicer in terms of the bar charts here. It looks kind of clunky, but you get the idea. What I'd like to do is bring up the images I used, or not I used, but the study used, for the two, you know, if there's a way I can fit these two in, I'm just kind of giving you an idea of what I would theoretically do. Somehow fit in, you know, the fact that this was the image given, or the two configurations given, this, and then I'd write, you know, put a little text box here, synthetic vision scenario with G1000, and you can put that in there, versus the 6-pack that they were given here. So we can squeeze that in there somehow. And like I said, I'm just giving you an example of how I would probably do it. I'd clean this up way more than I'm doing right now. I'm kind of doing it on the fly. I'm making it a little faster in that sense, just so you can see the thought process of how I'd set up this final. This is the there you go. So it's starting to look pretty good. Looks pretty fancy. So there you go. That's part of that. Limitations in feature research. So there's one limitation. Future research should investigate, let's say investigate perhaps response time, turnaround in a simulator with the two configurations. That's one potential way to really look at this. This is like kind of seeing the willingness to fly, but what I would possibly do in the future study is to take participants, put them in a simulator, give them two configurations, one with the G1000 with synthetic vision, have them fly through, you know, give them good weather throughout the flight, but then somehow change, you know, mid-flight through you know, change the weather in the simulator and see the response time. Are they going to keep on going because they've got synthetic vision? Is there going to be a significant difference between the time in which, you know, really gradually start changing the weather, getting it worse and worse and worse? That's not forecasted, and as they're flying, see if a group of pilots with the synthetic vision would respond and turn around later than people with a six-pack. So would they be willing to push further, go in a little bit more into the scenario, given that they've got the synthetic vision or the product that might allow them to go in, feel comfortable doing it, even though they're not IFR rated, let's say, or they're not on an IFR flight plan? Would they continue in on the flight? So there you go. That's a couple ideas of limitations in future research. So here you go. The findings support, in terms of discussion, findings support the hypothesis that pilots would potentially conduct a higher risk terrain flight given tools such as synthetic vision. So what else do we infer? So this discussion point is very important. You want to say that, what can I take home with the results that I got from the study? Well, the first one is that pilots would be potentially more willing to do that, right? Furthermore, we could say that while tools such as, while advanced tools are great in terms of situational awareness, they may elicit a more confident response, causing riskier decision making with pilots, right? This may cause pilots also to inadvertently fly IMC due to the configuration that they have. So what else can we infer from this? Let me just make sure I plug in my laptop before it dies. What else can we infer from this? Well, we can infer inadvertently. We can infer that if these results can be replicated on a larger scale, training or safety seminars should be held to discuss these trends. What do I mean by that? That means like, well, listen, because these new technologies are coming out, we need to be aware in terms of our training that this decision making may occur given the tools that the pilot has, right? So while we've talked about hazardous attitudes and things like that with pilots, this could, based off these results, lead down that direction. So that's what I mean by the discussion portion. The discussion portion of any of these studies is what can we inherently infer from the results? What can we expand on with respect to these results? And so that's what you want to do with this PowerPoint. So that's the presentation. You're making what's called a poster, research poster presentation. And then what I'd like you to do as an individual, even though it's between two people, each one of you, I'd like you to make a 5 to 10 minute elevator speech, if you want to think about it that way, based off this poster that you made. So what you'd want to do is go into insert, let's see if it's in here, audio, and record audio. And when you click it, what I'd like you to do is say, okay, imagine I'm standing in front of you and you've got this poster there, and I'd like you to just basically talk about your study. So go through each of these elements. What was the background? What was the purpose of your study? Don't just read the poster, really expand on the poster itself. How did you come about this methodology of doing this study? What were the hypotheses? What were the results? And discuss the results. What does it tell you? What are some of the limitations that we had? What would you expand with respect to the future research? And what are the discussion points with respect to the inferences of the results? So really expand on this scenario here that you've really created and got the results from. So you can really talk about this in about 5 minutes. I'm only looking for about 5 to 10 minutes, anywhere between that. Just in your own words, explain what the study was, what the results were, and some of the limitations in future research, and really what this does for us in the aviation field. What can we infer? What can we make points on, like things that we can think about with respect to the results that we saw from the study. Okay. All right, so that's the one of the studies that was done in this class. So hopefully this helps out. I'll make another video on the other research ones, but I'm not going to go into as much detail with respect to how to do each point. But hopefully that will give you some ideas there. Now that's the poster presentation. I posted a final paper example. So what I'm looking for is something along those lines. You don't need to do the whole beginning portion. I do want an abstract. An abstract's very short, just like a couple paragraphs of a summary of what you did, what the study was, right? Since not everyone's done the proposal portion of this, you can skip the introduction and purpose statement. I do want everyone to write a significance portion. What's the significance of the study? What will the study allow us to do? What were the limitations and delimitations of the study? You can skip the background because some of you did not do the literature review portion of things. That's fine. And then you can go straight into the research question, hypotheses, and methodology, kind of like how was this study done. Actually, you can skip the methodology if you'd like, because not everyone was able to do the same thing there. But what I'm really looking for your final paper is your data collection and analysis, results, kind of talk about the results like I did. Make sure you have the descriptive statistics. How many people were in the results? What was the split of commercial instrument, private students, or pilots, so that you can see, hey, is this something we want to look at in the future? And then discussion. Really expand on that discussion. What was the purpose? What does it really tell us? What are the limitations in future research? This one was short. I'd like you to really expand on that future research. What can you do to expand? What would you look at? Would you do this in a simulator? Would you change the scenario up a little bit? Would you change the different configurations? Would you add or subtract configurations? Would you add different things to the elements of the scenario in terms of not just weather, but PIREPs or anything along those lines that would allow you to increase the feature of the research studies? And then conclusion is just wrapping it up. So that's really the main elements of what I'm looking for as your final paper. You can skip the methodology. Like I said, I'm just looking for the results portion as well as the abstract, significance, and limitations and delimitations. That can be added in. Theoretically, everyone would have done their own study. That's really the goal that I was going for. But in this case, I will work around it. The main bulk of the grade that I'm looking for is your significance, limitations, delimitations, and scrolling down to data collection and analysis, results, discussion, and the limitations in future research and conclusion. So split that between the two of you. Remember, one color for one person, the other color for the other, so that I can see who did what in the work. And I know if it ends up where your group member does not do the portion of the work that is split, basically someone's got to decide if you're going to just do all the work yourself and show that that's what happened, and that's the grade that I'll grade it accordingly based off the split of work. That's just one of the pitfalls of group projects. I understand that. All right, so I'm going to post this, and you can watch and see how I did that, and probably follow along and do it on your own. If you have any questions, let me know. This will be due next week. I really need this done and submitted on Wednesday of next week, December 7th or something along those lines. Let me see here. December 9th, excuse me. So that way, if there are any issues, I can fix it up by December 11th, and that's when your grade is going to be due.